In a small-town bank, a routine $10,000 deposit by Marcus Johnson, a black entrepreneur, spiraled into a nightmare of handcuffs and accusations. But when he spoke 4 simple words in the interrogation room, the entire case unraveled, exposing a web of prejudice, corruption, and a fight for true justice that would leave a community forever changed. On a crisp autumn morning, in the quiet town of Fairview, Marcus Johnson, a 34-year-old black entrepreneur, walked into First Community Bank with a sense of accomplishment. He carried a neatly banded stack of $10,000 in cash, the hard-earned proceeds from his fledgling catering business, which had just landed a major contract with a local community center. Marcus, a father of 2 and a respected member of his church, had been saving for months to reinvest in his business, dreaming of opening a second location. The deposit was meant to be a step toward that goal, a moment of pride. But what happened next would thrust him into a battle he never anticipated. Marcus approached the teller, a young woman named Emily Carter, who had served him before. He smiled, handed over the cash, and filled out the deposit slip with care. The transaction seemed routine, but Emily's demeanor shifted as she counted the bills. Her eyes darted nervously to the bank manager, Mr. Harold Grayson, who was observing from his glass-walled office. Marcus noticed the exchange but thought little of it. Perhaps they were just being thorough. After all, $10,000 in cash wasn't an everyday deposit in a town like Fairview. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Emily had been instructed by Mr. Grayson to flag any large cash deposits, particularly those made by certain customers. Fairview, a predominantly white town with a history of racial tension, had a police department that often collaborated with local businesses under the guise of community safety. Mr. Grayson, influenced by years of unchecked biases and a recent string of news reports about money laundering in nearby cities, had developed a habit of scrutinizing deposits from customers who didn't fit his narrow definition of trustworthy. Marcus, with his dark skin and casual attire, had unknowingly caught Grayson's suspicion before he even walked through the door. As Marcus waited for his receipt, 2 police officers entered the bank. Officer Daniel Brooks, a seasoned cop with a reputation for quick arrests, and Officer Sarah Mitchell, a newer recruit eager to prove herself, approached the counter. Emily, following Grayson's whispered instructions, had called the police moments after Marcus handed over the cash, reporting a suspicious transaction. The officers asked Marcus to step aside for questioning, their hands resting on their holsters. The bank's customers, mostly elderly locals, watched in silence as Marcus complied, his heart beginning to race. "Sir, we need to ask you about this money," Officer Brooks said, his tone clipped. "Where did it come from?" Marcus, maintaining his composure, explained that the money came from his catering business, MJ's Soul Kitchen, which had recently catered a series of events for the community center. He offered to show receipts and invoices on his phone, but Officer Brooks waved him off, insisting they continue the conversation at the station. Before Marcus could protest, Officer Mitchell was guiding him toward the exit, her hand firmly on his arm. The bank's glass doors closed behind him as he was led to a patrol car, the weight of the moment sinking in. At the Fairview police station, Marcus sat in a stark interrogation room, his hands cuffed to a metal table. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, amplifying the tension in the air. Officer Brooks and a detective, Lieutenant James Carver, entered the room. Carver, a man in his late 40s with a stern face and a penchant for closing cases quickly, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Johnson, we've got a problem," Carver began. $10,000 in cash is a red flag. You know that, right? Banks are required to report transactions like that under federal law. And frankly, we've got reason to believe this money might be tied to illegal activity. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Lieutenant, I run a legitimate business. That money is from catering jobs. I've got records, contracts, everything. You can check with the community center. They'll confirm it." Carver smirked, leaning back in his chair. "We'll get to that. But right now, you're looking at potential charges for money laundering. Maybe more, depending on what we find. You want to help yourself? Tell us the truth." Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but held his ground. He had grown up in Fairview, where he'd faced subtle and not-so-subtle prejudice his entire life. He knew the stakes were high, especially for a black man in a room like this. But he also knew he had done nothing wrong. He repeated his story, offering to provide documentation, but Carver seemed uninterested, scribbling notes and exchanging glances with Brooks. The interrogation stretched on for hours. Carver pressed Marcus about his business, his clients, even his personal life, probing for inconsistencies. Marcus answered every question calmly, though the weight of their accusations grew heavier with each passing minute. The officers left the room briefly, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He thought of his wife, Lauren, who was likely wondering why he hadn't returned home, and his 2 daughters, who would be waiting for their bedtime stories. He couldn't let this spiral out of control. When Carver and Brooks returned, they carried a file folder, which they placed on the table with a deliberate thud. "We ran your name," Carver said. "No priors, which is good for you. But this money, it's not adding up. Why cash? Why not a check or a wire transfer? People don't just walk around with 10 grand in their pocket unless they're hiding something." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew he had one chance to shift the narrative. He leaned forward, looking Carver directly in the eyes, and said 4 words that would change everything. "Check the bank's cameras." The room fell silent. Carver's smirk faded, and Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus continued, his voice firm but calm. "The bank has cameras everywhere. Check the footage from the teller counter. You'll see me hand over money, fill out the deposit slip, everything. Then check the community center's records. Call my clients. You'll see I'm telling the truth." Carver's expression hardened, but Marcus could tell his words had landed. The detective hadn't expected such a direct challenge, one that could so easily be verified. The truth was, Carver and Brooks had acted on the bank manager's tip without much scrutiny, assuming Marcus's race, and a large cash deposit were enough to justify their suspicions. But Marcus's demand of camera footage introduced a new variable, one that could expose their hasty assumptions. Reluctantly, Carver agreed to review the footage. He sent Brooks to retrieve the bank security tapes while Marcus remained in the interrogation room, still cuffed. Hours passed, and Marcus's mind churned with worry. What if the footage was unclear? What if the bank refused to cooperate? But he clung to the hope that the truth would set him free. When Brooks returned, he carried a laptop and a USB drive. Carver played the footage, and there it was, Marcus standing at the counter, handing over the cash, filling out the deposit slip, and engaging in a brief, polite conversation with Emily. There was no sign of nervousness, no suspicious behavior, just a man making a legitimate transaction. Carver's face remained impassive, but Marcus could sense his unease. The next step was verifying Marcus's story with the community center. Carver made a call to the center's director, Ms. Angela Thompson, who confirmed that MJ's Soul Kitchen had catered multiple events, including a large fundraiser the previous weekend. She emailed over invoices and payment records, all of which matched Marcus's account. The money was legitimate, earned through months of hard work. Faced with undeniable evidence, Carver had no choice but to release Marcus. But the damage had been done. Marcus had spent nearly 8 hours in custody, his reputation questioned, his dignity challenged. As he walked out of the station, the weight of the experience settled over him. He wasn't just angry. He was determined to hold those responsible accountable. Marcus returned home to Lauren, who had been frantically calling the station after hearing from a neighbor that he'd been arrested. They sat together in their living room, Marcus recounting the ordeal, while Lauren listened, her eyes filled with tears. "They didn't even give you a chance to explain," she said, her voice trembling. "They just assumed you were guilty." The next morning, Marcus contacted a local civil rights attorney, Ms. Rachel Simmons, who had a reputation for taking on cases of racial profiling. Rachel listened to Marcus's story, her expression growing grim as he described the bank's role and the police's rush to judgment. "This isn't just about you," she said. "This is about a system that targets people like you. We're going to fight this." Rachel filed a lawsuit against the Fairview Police Department, First Community Bank, and Mr. Grayson personally, alleging racial discrimination, false arrest, and violation of Marcus's civil rights. She also reached out to local media, and soon